Hi, everyone. Welcome to Turning Point. I am your host, Blaine Birch with Dryrun. And joining me today is Rachel Fisch from High Rock Accounting, and you are the Chief Global Development Officer. I had to look it up just to make sure that I got the handle right there. But Rachel and I have known each other for a while. We've been seeing each other at various events in the accounting world, and so it's nice to actually catch up after kind of being locked in the basement for a year here. So thanks for joining me, Rachel.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so it's been a while. So how has it gone with you being working out of home for the last little while?
Well, the good thing is that I had already been working fully remotely. So for me and the work that I've been doing, I actually had a job change through this while still continuing to work remotely. The change was more when the kids' schedules shifted. So I'm in Ontario, and so we've had a little bit of back and forth with the schools being closed, and then they're open for a little bit, and then they're closed for a few more months, and then open a little bit. And so that part, it takes some getting used to, but my work doesn't really change too much, the schedule that I keep and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. It's amazing how many people I've talked to that have, I'll talk with them and they got a different role during this whole COVID thing, which is shocking how much movement there's been. And in fact, we've even hired a number of people too that I've never even met in person, which is weird. But
and now it's really interesting to see as offices are opening back up and as companies are getting back, if we're not going to see another kind of mass exodus from traditional office world. So it's the workplace and the future of work is definitely an interesting topic right now, for sure.
Yeah. And I know that, like I said, we've run into each other at a number of different conferences, and oftentimes we'll run into each other and you're in a different role from the previous one too. So you've done a lot of interesting things, but so I want to go all the way back to where you got started and just kind of dig in a little bit there.
Sure. I mean, like straight out of high school, while other kids were like working at McDonald's and stuff, I was doing office work and data entry, and then that went into accounts payable, and then just slowly taking on more and more accounting related duties. So when I got to grade 11 accounting, I had finished the whole course in like the first month, but then still had to actually attend the class, which was pretty terrible. But I talk to so many people who feel like they have become an accountant by accident. And so that I kind of feel like that a little bit. It just, accounting principles sometimes comes easier to others than it does to other people. And so this was an area that I seemed to thrive in. So I just kept moving in that direction. I had industry jobs all the way up till 2011, when my second daughter was born. So I had been in industry that whole time and not in practice at all. And then I decided that I really didn't want, we were living in a really small town at the time and without a designation, because I had just kind of worked my way through things. Yeah. There was only so much that I could be doing, and there were only so many larger companies within the small town that I was living in. And so that's when I decided to go into practice for myself and start doing some bookkeeping. I did, because I had corporate controllership roles previously. So I felt like I was able to bring more to kind of bookkeeping and more to the client than others could. But that's kind of how it all started.
So that corporate controllership, that's interesting, because I'm always really interested more in the operations side than, of course, tax side and stuff. I don't know much about that, but I'm always really interested
me too.
Yeah, and that operations side. But so how, I'm just curious. You went for quite a number of years, and then just walked out on your own. How did you how was that transition for you? How did you get your first clients? How did you get started?
Yeah, so it was honestly kind of weird, because I was coming off of my second maternity leave, which in Canada is a year. But I also knew that I couldn't wait a year to start my business because I didn't know how long it would take to actually start ramping up. So I spent that time not only caring for a newborn while also having, a small child at home, but also the I did all of my business planning. And so I did all of my market research, and there is a women in business kind of template that was super helpful through an organization that was based out of Winnipeg, actually. And so I was going through and I was doing all my research. So then I started doing, in the smaller town where I lived, which was Brandon, Manitoba, I started thinking about, well, who would be other professional services for people who I would want as my clients, somebody that I wouldn't be in competition with, but that might end up being a really good resource. And so I went to people like this, and they were wealth managers and they were insurance agents. And I was just kind of thinking of like the service ecosystem of a small business. And so I reached out to, several in my network that were of those kinds of professions. And overwhelmingly it was, why are you putting in this much work? Like, don't you just want to do bookkeeping? I was like, yeah, but I want to do it right. I want to have goals. I want to, run this as a business. And it was just so interesting to me that there was this overwhelmingly, well, then just tell somebody that you're doing bookkeeping and you'll do fine. So, I mean, we would still go along with the rest of the meeting where I would walk through my business plan and they're like, yes, absolutely. And if I can refer anybody. And so the majority of my clients, almost all of my clients, came from referrals, whether they were, as I said, wealth managers, insurance agents, CPAs, or once I did start getting clientele, then client referrals as well. So continued to grow that, had that for about 4.5 years. I think at our largest, I had about 5 staff, or 5 including myself. And then I got courted by Deloitte a little bit. And at the same time, while I had my own practice, I was also starting to train QuickBooks. So there was a funny story there, because I would talk to other bookkeepers. So first of all, this was kind of like online collaboration is a thing. And so bookkeepers in my own town saw me as competition. They didn't see me as, there's enough customers for everybody, which was my kind of naive stance on things. I still believe that, but that's fine. And so they weren't very open with how I could go about doing my business. But one of the things that I kept asking was, should I learn QuickBooks or Sage? Like, does it matter how many clients use what? And they said, well, actually, it's pretty 50-50. So just kind of go with what your clients use, which I thought was great advice at the time, which of course now it's terrible advice. But so I started with QuickBooks just because the people who came to me needed QuickBooks. I was one of the first bookkeepers in Canada using QuickBooks Online, before you could do a bank rec, before you could print checks. And I feel like bookkeepers from that era of QuickBooks Online, it's like, there's a common bond of sticking with this product for so long. But it was simply because my client worked on a Mac and I worked on a PC, and there was genuinely not a lot of options out there for us to be able to work on the same file and not duplicate work. So that's what we started using. But I reached out to company called Real World Training. I still have trouble saying that, because they did a lot of QuickBooks training in Canada. And I said, you guys really need to do some more QuickBooks training in the prairies, because I'm out here and you guys have tons of sessions, Alberta and BC and Ontario, and there's like no training for us out here. And by the end of the call, I was signed up as a trainer. I started to train
Nice.
QuickBooks. We just started talking, and that wasn't ever my intention at all. But once I was going through the material, I realized that I actually knew almost all of it already, and that there's no better way to learn than to teach. And so that's kind of how that got started. So that's, started speaking at conferences, got on Deloitte's radar, and so made my move from my little practice in Brandon, Manitoba, over to Deloitte.
What I find a little bit interesting there, I gotta get this buzzing out of my ear. Sorry, something was buzzing. I thought I had everything on don't buzz mode, but apparently not. The thing I find kind of interesting is just the way you approach this, because you've been so involved in partnerships, and now like I just find it interesting how you've moved up to like quite an interesting, like, chief global development officer. Well, how do you move
it's
to
super
that?
awesome, actually.
Yeah. And but what I find really interesting is when you start your own business, you just approach it differently than everybody else. Like you basically started down a partnership route right away. You start reaching out to people, you start looking for where you can get referrals. You talk with, that's a rare commodity. And that's it's just an interesting approach that I think a lot of people can learn from. You want to start a business. One of the biggest challenges at times is like, how do you grow? How do you get more, how do you get activity? How do you get clients? And just to go out and talk with people and look for referrals seems like such a natural, but most people don't do it. And that was like your go-to.
No.
And I found that it really interesting.
Well, and so first of all, the partnership aspect of my work has stayed consistent through whatever role I've been in, whatever company I've been at. There's always been, for me, it's just why would you not, when there are people who specialize in exactly the thing that you don't know, right? Build up that network, refer each other business, because it's so much easier than learning it all yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know, to me, it was just common sense. So that partnership, that belief in strong partners has, lasted throughout as well. But also, I mean, if you see bookkeepers on Facebook groups and they're talking about, where's the best place to advertise and those and marketing and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't market, but I'm saying that if you haven't exhausted all of your CPA leads first, because if a CPA finds an extremely capable bookkeeper, they will keep them busy. Like they will build their business for them essentially, right? Because once you get that accountant, they're going to refer you to other accountants, or once you get that accountant in a firm, you have one contact, they're going to recommend to the rest of the firm. So it's just such a very powerful relationship when you can get that right, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said that Deloitte sort of came knocking at your door. Now I assume that probably was you had developed again relationships with them. I'm guessing that's that's how these things work. It's not totally by accident, right?
Yeah, well, it actually came, so it was a couple of things. It actually came out of the training role because what I would do is I would do like the regular certification classes and, the advanced classes for QBO and stuff like that. And then I would also be brought into some of Intuit's internal conversations. And I know that they've done this with other like trainers and practitioners as well, where they're trying to sell to a firm. And so they've got, probably one or two key apps there in the room or as part of the conversation, or of course the virtual room right now. But I would go in and talk about some of the automation tools. So I would talk about bank feeds and, how to quickly set up a file, or especially for larger firms, like it was less about how to create an invoice than it was about here's how to manage your team. And so, keep going over QuickBooks Online Accountant for some of those teams. And the thing with these calls is that you had to be available or on for like a 90-minute, sometimes a 2-hour call, not quite sure when you were going to be talking. And not quite sure, even if you only talked for 5 or 10 minutes, there could end up being, follow-up questions half an hour later that you need to be available for. So the part that I actually got really fascinated with was sitting on these calls, sitting on mute, being ready to jump in whenever it was my time to do that, but just hearing a lot more of the higher level strategy on how do we start incorporating automation and how do we, move to the cloud and all of that. Now this was, again, a while ago. So this was 2014 to 2016, maybe. And so it was still like those conversations were happening all the time. I'm sure they still are, but I feel like I've lost my patience with having to have that conversation. I feel like I'm at a point now where it's not my job to convince you to go to the cloud. If you're not there already, that's fine, but that's not my job to get you there. So I can just concentrate on what my job is. I can just, make sure that I'm having conversations with those who I don't have to convince of anything. They're already there. They're already working in full automation. So it's interesting to see how that has also like shifted, because I mean, the early adopters for like cloud bookkeeping and stuff like that were over 10 years ago now. If I still need to talk to you about going to a cloud product, we're in different spaces.
Yeah, and I
Not in the
think
same
this
space.
whole work from home has I think sped that up even further and made it even more
Absolutely it has.
essential. So it's, yeah, I think we're finding the same thing. Is it's just like, well, if you're not, well, come back later when you finally
Right?
get
Like
to it, right? Because it's just
I've got
different.
enough opportunities.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
So how did because I know well, I think when I met you, you were with Sage. So where did that
Yes.
notch into this timeline here?
So I was at Deloitte and it was not exactly going as planned. And for anybody who saw the news about MNP taking over Deloitte's cloud practice, although uh, the PR, the press release didn't specifically say that, but I knew which cities our hubs were in, and those just happened to be the cities that MNP acquired during the dislocation. So I feel like you can kind of get a sense for how their role there went. The fact that
Yeah.
they were willing to divest of the whole practice. I just think that there's just such a difference between, wanting to be able to provide a service, hiring people who specialize in that area, but then having a structure that just does not enable those things to actually work together. So it was an extremely frustrating year, and I did say that I would give it a year. I did. I almost didn't make it past 4 months, but I did make it a year. Because a year and 3 months, actually, I was at Sage. So it started several months before that when I was reaching out to Sage because I had heard that they had been doing some work on their cloud product. So I was reaching out to them to say, okay, we're already using QBO. Some of our offices are using Xero, but it's really not getting a lot of traction. So let's take a look at and see what Sage has. And so they came and presented me actually not at all the product that I was asking to be demoed. They had some ideas about what I wanted to see being from Deloitte, and not realizing that we were actually just looking for a cloud bookkeeping practice. We still laugh about it because to me it was like so there were a few people in the room for this meeting, and getting their take on how that went is still really humorous to me, where you could tell it did not go well. But they were incredibly, they were just great people, and they knew their stuff, and they probably pitched what they were told to pitch, right? So, but we all went out for lunch and had a fantastic lunch, and then stayed in touch. And then I was, trying to find more out about this other product. And so ended up in a bit of a thread. And I kept getting these, hey, so we happen to have this opening for this accountant channel leader. And so we, if you think of anybody, let us know. I'm like, yeah, actually, there's this other person over here. I think she would be fantastic for it. You should definitely check her out. Then about a month later, it was like, on another thread talking about something else. Oh, and by the way, we have this accountant channel leader role. If you can think of anybody, well, yeah, I already told you to talk to this person over there, but maybe you didn't get the message. So make sure you check her out. And by the third time, this came up as an inquiry, I messaged one of the people from that first meeting, and I said, am I missing a hint here? What's going on? You guys keep asking me if I know people, and I keep telling you people. And so, yeah, I ended up sitting down with them and got really excited about being able to, serve accountants and bookkeepers. While I was a trainer, I think that was one of the things that I really enjoyed the most, was building up this community of bookkeepers across Canada who actually did collaborate with each other and could learn together and share and learn from each other's mistakes and things like that. And so Deloitte didn't love that there was this opportunity for me to kind of be training the competition or be, involved in that way. And yet for me, it was so critical, even in my role as Deloitte, to continue being part of the community. And so we didn't always agree there. But this to me was my opportunity to actually take this thing that I believed in, which was, Canadian bookkeepers connecting and collaborating and creating community. It's a lot of C's, but just take that to a whole new level that I just didn't think that I could ever do as a job. So to me, it was pretty much a no-brainer. And so I was there for 3.5 years until I actually left just this past fall to come to High Rock. So see, this is only my second. I've been in different jobs at the same employer, but this is only my second employer since you've known me.
Okay, so yeah, could be different. Different jobs.
Because at Sage, it's like your job changes annually. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I find it interesting that, because we talk with, accountants and bookkeepers and CFOs, all the controllers and all these people, every day. And most of them that we're talking with, like they have their own business and they're trying to figure out, how do they grow their business and how do they grow their business? How do they grow their business? And it just seems to be something that you've just been really good at is you've mentioned it. It's those partnerships, it's communities, it's all of these conversations, it's all of this chat. And it's, I guess some people I think are probably not as comfortable with that, but it feels like that's the place where if you're going to get out of your comfort zone, that's the place. That's where you can make things
absolutely.
Really
Yeah. And I think that there's also, I mean, if you think about the kind of person that makes a really good bookkeeper, they're very detail oriented. They enjoy kind of sitting on their own. They're very independent workers. Many are introverts. I learned actually a few years ago just how much of an introvert I am, where I can go out and I can do the events and I can speak, but then I'm going to be like curled up in bed for a week after just recovering, because it's a whole other level of exhausting. Extroverts get their energy from those situations and kind of feel like they're on a high. And for me, I crash and I just need to recover. And so I think that there's a fear in just kind of putting yourself out there, but we're not talking about, creating relationships with a room full of people all at the same time. These really are personal relationships and close-knit networks. And I mean, even you and I think there's a bit of a special thing in Canada where, as a Canadian practitioner, when I find out that there's amazing Canadian tech, I'm a huge advocate. Like, how can I help? What can I do? Because I think there's a lot of great tech in Canada and we want to get that on the map. So I'm a big advocate for that anyway. But I mean, you and I haven't had a lot to do directly with our jobs. And yet it's always, if you need anything, reach out. Like, how can I help? So I don't know. I just think that jobs are too big and the world's too small to not, I don't know, think that way.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I know, like when we first met, I'm sure you had actually, like, it came over to me and was asking me about like our technology, and you wanted to talk about Sage, and I'll say there's one thing that I really miss is I don't miss the airplanes and the hotels, but I miss being in the trade show rooms and the conference halls where you have those side conversations, and you meet and you start to see the same people and develop like you said, that community and those relationships. And it's amazing how far they go. And it's weird to have kind of like a year and a half off of this kind of thing. Like, it's bizarre.
And they're just starting to come back. And now it's like, how comfortable am I with that? I don't know. It's weird. It's weird.
Yeah, it'll be I think a slow transition, and I'm not sure if we'll be they still haven't really opened up the border yet, so it's or just sort of starting to, so we'll see how this goes for the fall. But so so you've come all the way through, you've come through now Sage, a big international brand, and now you're with them, and you're working on the accounting channel, and then all of a sudden you move to High Rock, and so how did that whole transition happen?
Would you believe it was through a relationship and partnering?
Totally not surprised.
I mean, if you spend time building up your networks, and good things come. And I think that this was one of those things. So I met Liz Mason back in 2017, about 4 years ago, when we were both invited to be part of the first cohort for Accounting Salon. And it's a mastermind group of some amazing accountants and accounting professionals, many of which have actually gone on to work in technology. So we actually have a blend of, people who work in apps like Gusto and Giraffe, as well as large firms, as well as solopreneurs and everything in between, tax professionals, accountants, in lots of different industries as well. So the concept behind it, so it was from Amanda Aguilard and David Leary. The concept behind it was, where do the conference speakers go to get challenged? Because like if you've spoken at conferences, which I did a lot of, especially with my, QuickBooks training role, it just ends up feeling like the same things kind of over and over again. And, it was kind of going back to that, well, I've already been in the cloud for 5 years. I don't need to hear another session about why I need to go to the cloud. And so where do the conference speakers go? Where do those early adopters go to really get challenged? And a lot of that, the idea was that the best conversations, the most challenging and like life-changing and career-changing conversations are usually in the bar afterwards, or usually, at the end of a session where there's like a few people kind of gathered at the back or in a hall somewhere. They're not in the sessions or in the keynotes or anything like that. And so I think the idea was born, well, let's just have all of those people come together so that we can really start challenging each other and really start even connecting, right? And knowing who each other are in the industry. And so that's how it started. And so that was about 4 years ago. So Liz and I were in that first cohort. And so she gave me a call. I don't know if it was last summer or fall, but it was kind of like, hey, I've got this crazy idea, which is kind of like a Liz and I thing. Usually those things come at like midnight on a Friday night or Saturday night. Hey, I've got this crazy idea. And then we just keep building on each other's crazy ideas. And so when she shared her vision for, what she felt High Rock needed to really start growing and start building, and of course to go global, it involved this role that I just, like, you had me at hello, like you don't even have to sell me on it. It's just like, yeah, sign me up. How do we do this? And so since then, basically, my very first project coming on board was to take a look at our internal tech stack, because I think that when a lot of people take a look at scaling, they usually take a look at marketing. They don't take a look at, have we removed as many pain points as possible? Have we smoothed out our processes to be as efficient as possible? And so what we've been spending a lot of time doing is looking inward first, specifically at our technology and our processes, cleaning all of that up. And so maybe we can do a follow-up session to this when I can kind of share with you what we're up to. Because I feel like the more I was looking into what firms our size, like what our pain points are, it's like we hit this wall of growth that makes it really challenging, because we're not a super small firm anymore. Like Monday.com or ClickUp doesn't really cut it anymore, but we're also not going to invest in something like SAP or, even Salesforce to do everything that we needed to do doesn't do it either. There's this kind of black hole of this gap in technology for firms our size that are growing quickly. So far, all of the growth that we've had has been organic, but part of my job also is to look at mergers and acquisitions globally. So we'll be launching within Canada within 2021. And then we've got other markets mapped out in future years as well. But none of that would be possible unless we had the technology and the processes in place to be able to do that. And so that's why those two things are connected. And so, yeah, we just started a really amazing project. Just a few weeks ago, actually, we started, and we should be done by the end of the year, where basically everything from lead all the way through to close management and deliverables for the client is managed in a single feel platform. So both internally and then with client portal and all that. So so we'll see how that goes. But we really had to kind of put our creative hats on to make sure that if we're bringing on, if we acquire a firm and there's a dozen staff and a couple hundred clients, how the heck are we going to get them trained up if we're using 8 different apps, right? How do we smooth out even the transition with the clients, unless we know exactly what our onboarding process is, what the team outline looks like, how our industry verticals, align with where they work and what their specialty is. So yeah, it's a lot of this for now. It's a lot of this behind the scenes work, but yeah, you'll be hearing some announcements soon.
Yeah, well, and that's something that I've learned. Now that we're talk with so many CPAs, so many CPA firms as our core customer, and that acquisition is really the way they grow. And I didn't realize that it's acquisition, and then you see that it's hard to like you're talking tech stack, and then there's culture, and there's all of these other things, and they how often they still seem to almost remain siloed with the same name, but very different.
Yes.
And so it's that was a real learning for us to, kind of understand.
It is a whole other world of challenges, and I wasn't ever naive to them. But I mean, even going through kind of the purchasing process with the bidding and even knowing who's for sale for pizza, like sometimes that's the biggest challenge, just to even get to that level of information. And then there's so much due diligence that needs to come before even a letter of intent or an initial offer can come out. And then the due diligence, when you're really digging in for the quiet period before you can even announce the close. So there's a lot to it. I've done a couple of posts on LinkedIn and elsewhere that talks about, it's very much a roller coaster where you talk about how excited you are to work together. And then if you guys can't, agree on terms or something that you're both comfortable with, then it's just not going to work out.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that, Liz has always said is that we're human centric, but digital first. And so that sight of making sure that fit is right, starting from the owner and then working through the other staff, is absolutely critical before we even get to the finance talk. Because if the fit isn't there, then I actually don't care if the finances work. It's not going to work. So I think everybody has different strategies around acquisition. So what types of firms are they acquiring? How much work are they interested in doing? If they're not already transformed to cloud, there's a lot of strategy and a lot of work behind the scenes before you ever see something posted about an acquisition, for sure.
Yeah. Well, this has been, really interesting. I know we're coming up close on the hour here. Sure. But this has been a really interesting conversation. Like I said, the part I was really intrigued by was, you start in one place, and it's been relationships and partnerships all the way through to the point now. Those relationships and partnerships have so much to do with actually acquiring firms and growing
sure.
High Rock. So it's a really interesting journey, a lot of interesting stories in there. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, and I never would have thought that I even would have had the positions that I have. And yet every time I've gotten to a new position, I never could have done this except for all of the experience that brought me to this point. And so my last year at Sage was actually spent as a product manager for a product within the accountants channel. I had never been a product manager before. I had never thought I ever wanted to be a product manager before. But now that we've got this technology project going, I never would be able to actually do that with as much leadership as I can now, had I not had that year of product management experience. So it's all connected. Everything's a learning experience. And yes, absolutely leverage your network. Use those partners.
For sure. And those learnings, like you said, they're so important, and they build, and I see that from entrepreneurs all the time. It's finding those opportunities and jumping in on the opportunity and just go, it's a good place to learn. It's a good place to move forward. So, well, thanks so much. How should people track you down if they'd like to connect with you or talk with you at all?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, of course, as with all accounting professionals. So Rachel Fisch on there. And then I'm also on Twitter at Fischbooks, FISCHBOOKS.
All right, terrific. Well, thanks so much, Rachel. And again, everyone, I'm Blaine with Dryrun. If you're looking for something to help you with your financial modeling, cash management, and definitely if you're a CPA that's moving towards offering those advisory services, we can definitely help you do that. So come check us out at dryrun.com. So thanks so much, Rachel. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Blaine.